Hi class, we're in for a wild ride. Income and substitution effects are really complicated, and they're probably the most complicated thing that we're going to do in this class. So we're on take 2, which is still covering the same pages that we covered with the take 1, and that was pages 52 through 57. But this time we're going to look at income and substitution effects in a little bit different way. So in our last little video, we looked at what happens when price increases. And we used the Slutsky equation to say a change in quantity given a change, and we're using own price. Change in quantity given a change in the price of food is equal to a change in the quantity of food given a change in the price of food, holding utility constant, and then we subtracted the quantity of food, a change in the quantity of food given a change in income. And we saw that this was less than 0. Price goes up, quantity goes down. And it was due to the substitution effect, which said this is less than 0 too. As the price of food goes up, the quantity of food goes down, holding utility constant, meaning you substitute out of the own good. And then we saw that for a normal good, which meant as income went down because the price went up, quantity also went down. We saw this going in the same direction with the substitution effect decreasing the quantity of food and the income effect decreasing the quantity of food, making this total effect really big. So we can see a couple of other examples. We can look at a price increase, and we can say the change in the quantity of food given a change in the price of food, and we can say we expect the total effect to be less than 0. The change in the quantity of food given a change in the price of food, holding utility constant. We also expect that to be 0, and then we subtract what happens if we have a change in the quantity of food multiplied by a change in the quantity of food over a change in income. What happens if this good is inferior? An inferior good says as income decreases due to the price change, the quantity of food will actually increase, making this effect positive. And so a negative minus, less than 0. A negative minus a minus is going to be less negative. So what this says is the substitution effect pulls you out of the quantity of food, and the income effect will pull you in to the quantity of food. We can also have the very, very unusual case where this could be positive in the case of a Giffen good, where the change in the quantity of food given a change in the price of food, utility equals constant, is less than 0 minus a change in the quantity of food multiplied by a change in the quantity of food over a change in income, where the good is so inferior that this negative minus the negative is actually positive. In other words, the substitution effect has you substituting out, but the good is so inferior that the income effect has you buying more, so that the total price effect is greater than 0. Very unusual. And of course, the classic example is the potato famine. In Ireland. So last time we did this, and this time I'm going to show you an inferior good. So as always, we have a budget line and an indifference curve, and we can find the quantity of food that we demand and the quantity of other goods that we demand in equilibrium. And we said last time that we wanted to increase price. Again, when you change price, the budget line rotates around the maximum quantity of the good. The price doesn't change. In this case, increasing price decreases our consumption possibilities, and so our budget line rotates in and towards the origin. Now, remember that we said that we have this little secret that we can try, and that is to find the breakdown between the income and the substitution effect. We draw a line tangent to the original indifference curve, which is this, U1, parallel to the new budget line, which is red. And we see the point here. Now this QF star represents the substitution effect. I'm substituting out of current consumption, given my preferences, at higher prices if you compensated me to tell me I could buy as much as I could before. QF2 on the final budget line and indifference curve, which represents the same set of preferences as U1. Pretend this will never cross. The movement of QF1 to QF2 is the total effect. So notice what you have here is you have the total effect going from QF1 to QF2, the original black budget line and indifference curve, to the new and final red budget line and indifference curve. And we had this intermediate effect, or the substitution effect, of the green, holding utility constant. How would you have to compensate me? And that's where we drew the imaginary budget line parallel to the new and final budget line at higher prices and tangent to the original utility curve. So we have found the substitution effect and the total effect. What is the income effect? Well, the income effect, you know, is that parallel shift from the old or original budget line, which is black, to the new budget line. But we're looking at the movement from Q star to QF2 as the income effect. That movement from the imaginary equilibrium point where I can compensate you, and then moving to the final quantities. So the total effect is QF1 to QF2. The substitution effect is QF1 to QF star. The income effect is QF star to QF2. Now what you can see here, and I can go back to the previous slide, is we have an inferior good as an example on the next page. Remember, with inferior goods, the change in the quantity of food given a change in income. Income goes down, quantity goes up. That means that income effect is less than zero. It's a negative. Adding the whole Slutsky equation, a change in the quantity of food given a change in the price of food. Still, we took less from QF1 to QF2. Less than zero is equal to a change in the quantity of food given a change in the price of food, holding utility constant minus the original quantity of food times the income effect. So we have a movement substituting out of food. Here we can see substituting out of food and subtracting that from something that's less than 0, which means we have competing substituting out but taking more food because it's an inferior good. The substitution effect and the income effect go in opposite directions. But the total effect is still less than 0. Now that actually takes us back to saying that oftentimes we can say that price elasticities are the absolute value of the change. And that's because even if this is a negative number, I don't know, 1.24 for an elasticity, if we express that as 1.24, we still expect a 1% increase in the price to decrease the quantity demanded by 1.24. That's why we can usually say the absolute value. So what is it about these price changes? Well, we can say some things about what we expect the size of that income and substitution effect to be. We can say that the more and better substitutes a good has, the larger the substitution effect, ceteris paribus, and the larger the own price effect. So if I have really good substitutes, you can imagine me substituting out of that good when the price goes up. And even if it's a normal good, well, if it's a normal good, the income effect will be smaller but going in the same direction. What about if I had substitutes and I had an inferior good? Well, for a very good substitute, I'm substituting out, and the income effect taking me back in will be small. In both of these cases, you can see that the total price effect is going to be quite large. There's another proposition that says the more responsive the demand for a good is to income, that is, the larger the income effect, the larger the total price effect. So let's look at the income effect of a price change. And let's say they're not really good substitutes, so we would substitute out. But if it's very responsive to income and it's a normal good, the income effect will be large and you will take a lot less. So the total price effect is large. Now, what about if we have an inferior good and we had a substitution effect and we had a large income effect, and here I'm going to say just this large, we might see either no change in demand or substitution effect, pretty strong income effect, a small price effect, total price effect, or in the case of a given good that is so inferior we get a given good. So what about the case of that Irish potato famine? Indeed, the price of potatoes kept going up and up and up. The good became so scarce. Well, the substitution effect said, well, it's so expensive, I want to substitute out of it. But it was such a staple in the diet, and people had nothing else to eat. It was so inferior that as people's income effect went down because the price went up, they actually demanded more and more and more of it because they couldn't survive without it. That means it was so inferior, the income effect outweighed the substitution effect, and you got a total price effect that was positive. This, again, is highly unusual. Really, what you will see are these two effects. And that's where we'll stop for today.